in Delaware relief grants that are available to small businesses. And on this evening, we had a primary focus in informing, educating, and supporting minority-owned businesses through the application process. Minority-owned businesses and workers of color have been hit particularly hard during this pandemic, and that is why we are committed as members of the Delaware Legislative Black Caucus to taking proactive steps to engage these business owners and businesses now to make sure that they are aware of the program and have the same opportunity to benefit from the assistance that it provides. And so on this evening, we all will hear from the director of the Delaware Division of Small Business, Damian DeStefano, as he reviews and goes over the Delaware Relief Grant Program. At this time, I'm going to allow way for our caucus members to come with greetings, and then I'll come back to begin our session with Director DeStefano. Representative Chakocha.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here to participate. Really looking forward to this program and the information that will be presented to assist our constituents and the small businesses. So glad everyone can be here to participate this evening.
Representative Cook.
Yes, I'd like to thank everyone for participating today. It's heartfelt. This is what is needed to have our entrepreneurs and our minority businesses to participate and to be active and participate in getting funding and economic strength. And I'm looking forward to this great day of this important, very important meeting that we're having this evening. Thank you.
Representative Kendall Johnson.
Good evening, everyone. To all of the participants out there who have signed up and taken the first step with learning more about how this relief program and how it can support your business, I applaud you. I hope that this session will provide you with all of the necessary information you need so that you can move forward and continue to have a thriving business. Again, thank you all for being here.
Senator Lockman.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Good evening to our business owners, our Black business owners of Delaware. It's an honor to have you all here this evening. And it's an honor for us to be able to share information about the Relief Fund. And, you know, we know that you're the backbone and the future for so many in our community, and we want to help you return to strength and keep going from strength to strength. So thank you for being here, and we hope that you get a lot out of this evening.
Representative Minor Brown.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. As we all know, COVID-19 has unexpectedly come in and just thrown everything in disarray. And I want you all to know that we are here for you. After this event, please feel free to reach out to us with any additional questions or concerns, and enjoy.
All right. With that, on behalf of Representative Stephanie T. Bolden and Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker, want to thank everybody for being here. All of our members of the Delaware Legislative Black Caucus. And Director DeStefano, we will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator, and senators and representatives. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to some folks who are interested in learning more about the DE relief grants. This is not our first webinar, but you guys tonight have the advantage of being our first webinar since we actually launched the program. And so I'll be able to actually talk about a little bit about what we're seeing from the initial applications we've gotten, because there are things that, you know, common mistakes people are making. that are causing rejections that we just want to be able to share. Now that we see them, we'll be able to share them with you guys so that you can be prepared for it when the next round of funding opens up, which will be at the latest October 1st, likely to be October 1st. This was the initial round was September 8th. We planned on having the portal open probably for a couple weeks, but got way more applications than we expected over the first 36 hours it was open. And so had to close it because no more funding was available in this round. We're now processing those applications, and we'll be reopening the portal with an additional funding availability October 1st. It's at least another $30 million to be made available. And it takes about, from the time we receive it to the time you get your grant, which is the most important thing, is about 3 weeks. And right now we're right on track to process those 1,600 applications within the 3-week time period. So, all right, I'll try to go through this fairly quickly and leave time for questions. But this is the meat of what you want to think about as you're thinking about applying for a DE relief grant. So I like to explain it as, and I apologize for anybody who's heard me explain this before with my weak metaphor, but it's the grant is, you think about the grant in two pieces. You have to figure out what the size of your bucket is. And you figure that out using your 2019 gross revenue on your 2019 federal tax returns. And you have to figure out how to fill up that bucket. And you fill up that bucket with eligible expenses, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But this is the first one. How do you figure out the size of your bucket? It's all based on, the grant size is all based on your 2019 revenue. It's your gross revenue, top line on your tax return, your federal tax return, what you filed with the IRS. And it's all a percentage of your revenue. And it works, it kind of works like income tax, where as you move to each new bracket, you're taking a lower percentage, but only on the revenue earned within that bracket. So earned between 0 and 500, you take 6%. That means if you earned $400,000 in 2019 in total gross revenue, you're going to take 6% of that amount, and that's your grant amount. The minimum grant amount that you can be eligible for, the minimum bucket size, is $15,000. So if you're below $250,000 of revenue, you're not even going to do any calculations. You're just going to take $15,000. You still have to fill that up with $15,000 of eligible expenses. But that's the minimum amount you can be qualified for. It should be a little bit helpful for some of those smaller businesses. Next, so you take 6%. If you're above $500,000, you're still going to take that full 6% on the first $500,000 of revenue. That's equivalent to $30,000. You're going to carry that $30,000 with you, move to the next bracket, which is the 500 to 1 million bracket. Now you're going to be taking 4% of all revenue earned between $500,000 and $1 million. So if you earn $900,000, you're going to carry that 30. You're going to take 4% of 400,000, which is everything in excess of the original 500, between 500 and 1 million, and you're going to have your grant amount that you'll be eligible for. Continuing on with that, hopefully it's making sense now how the system works. But so you'll carry, if you get up to 1 million, that's equivalent to $50,000. You'll carry that $50,000 with you, and then you'll take 1.5% of all revenue you earn between 1 to 2.5 million. That brings you up to 72.5K. If you earned more than $2.5 million of revenue, everything in excess of $2.5 million, you'll take 1% of every dollar until you reach the maximum grant amount, which is $100,000. If your revenue, that's right around $5 million of gross revenue, a little bit higher than $5 million of gross revenue. If your revenue in 2019 was more than $5 million, you're still eligible for the grant. You're not ineligible. You're just going to max out at $100,000 that you can have. All right. So that's how you figure out the size of your bucket. Now we'll talk a little bit about how you fill up that bucket. And this part I think is important, and where we're seeing, I think, the most questions on the program. So in order to maximize the grant that you're eligible for based on your revenue, you need to be able to identify certain expenses that you've incurred that were related to COVID-19. We provide both reimbursement, looking backwards, and funding if you're going to plan to make that expenditure throughout the rest of the year. So the time frame you're thinking about here is April 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2020. If you already made the expenditure, you can apply for that, get reimbursement, even if you already paid for it. If you plan to make the expenditure throughout the rest of this year, you can apply for that, get the grant, and use the grant funds to make that expenditure. You can mix both in an application. So you can have an application, and many of our applications are, both backwards looking and forwards looking. So you're thinking about, you might be purchasing, many businesses are purchasing monthly PPE. That would be an equipment purchase. You'd apply for all of the money you've spent from now until, from April 1st until now on PPE. You'd also say, I estimate that I'm going to spend this much for the rest of the year, and apply for that as well. We'll talk at the end of this slide about that estimation process and why it shouldn't be too scary. So these are the 5 categories of eligible expenses for all businesses. We'll get into a 6th category for certain disproportionately impacted businesses later in the presentation, but an equipment purchase you made to make your business safer for COVID-19. Below here, you'll see some examples, but it's more expansive than this. It's really any expenditure you've made on equipment related to that you wouldn't have made had it not been for COVID-19. So if you purchased a bunch of hardware for your employees, technology hardware for your employees because they were working remotely now, that would be an eligible expense. What's not an eligible expense is an equipment purchase that you made during this period of time that wasn't because of COVID-19. The one I always use, I got to think of new metaphors in case people have seen me multiple times, but the one I always use is if you're a restaurant and every year you purchase napkins because your napkins only last about a year, and this May you purchased a bunch of new napkins, they would not be an eligible expense because it was not due to COVID-19 that you had to purchase those napkins. So that's the way to think about it. Next, refinancing any debt you incurred due to COVID-19. This is if you had to take out a loan from the federal government, an EIDL loan. Many folks had to do that over the period of April to December or April to now. So if you took out an EIDL loan, you can refinance a portion or all of that loan with the funding that you received. So even if you haven't started to make payments, you can clear that debt off your books if that's helpful. You could refinance a loan from a private entity. You can refinance if you had a PPP loan and a portion of it went unforgiven, you could refinance that as well. So it's just a way to get out from under the debt that we know many businesses have incurred. Hopefully clear most of it off your books, be able to move forward without having to make a payment. On this one, the only caveat I'll remind people of is if you do have a loan through a private lender, just check with your bank. Sometimes there are prepayment penalties if you pay down debt early. It's not a big deal for the purposes of this grant. You'll just want to look at other eligible expenses because this won't be an option for you. Most commercial loans usually don't have prepayment penalties. That's usually more on a residential loan, but you do want to check with your bank. Just ask them. Next, technological enhancements undertaken in order to adapt your business model for COVID-19. This is something a lot of small business owners have been doing, upgrading their website, maybe building a website for the first time because customers are not going into the store like they used to. Maybe you want to build a mobile app. Maybe you want to be able, you had to do some point of sale upgrades in order to incorporate credit card sales, things like that. Those would all be eligible expenses as a technological expense. You'd also be able to do it looking forward. So one thing we've talked to many small businesses, they say, look, I could reach a lot of my customer base that was shopping here prior to COVID-19, but I don't have a website. And unfortunately, because of the situation that I've been going through as a business in the last few months, I don't have the money to pay for a website. Well, you could get a grant now that could help you to build that website out. So that's an eligible expense. And again, could be forward looking. You give us an estimate of what you think you'll pay, and then we'll give you a grant for that amount up to the amount that up to your bucket size, the amount you're eligible for. All right. Next. So those first 3 are really the big 3 categories. I think most expenses fall into those categories. But the next 2, you have advertising expenses. I'm sorry, just the last slide, the previous slide. You have advertising expenses. That's advertising efforts you've undertaken as a result of COVID-19. This is just advertising you might have had to do to customers to tell them, these are our new hours, or these are some of the safety measures we're taking. It's not your regular advertising that you would have done in the course of business, but new advertising you had to do. Maybe you had to do advertising online that you had not done before. That was a new additional cost for you. You'll be able to apply for reimbursement for that. And again, going forward. So if you want to ramp up your advertising, reach more customers throughout the end of the year, you can apply for a grant for that. And then finally, I'm going to go really quickly through this one because it is a real niche one, but fixed expenses accrued during COVID-19. This is not a rent payment that you made during COVID-19, but rather some landlords have agreed to abate a rent payment and tack it on to the end of the rent, or tack it onto your monthly payment going forward. While that was helpful, maybe during those months, having the extra $200, $300 in rent payment to have to make going forward could be a burden for some small businesses. And so we wanted to give you a chance to get funding. You have to talk to your landlord to make sure that you can clear that off. But say you owe them, $2,000 in rent. That again, it's not rent you didn't pay that they want owed to them. It's that it was an arrangement made that they would delay the rent payment and just tack it on to the regular course of the lease. You can clear that money out so you can go back to your regular lease payment. This list below is not exhaustive of expenses that are not eligible, but these are the most common questions we get about expenses that are not eligible. Your payroll expenses during this period are not an eligible expense. You cannot use them for the grant. Health insurance premiums, that goes along with payroll, other post-employment benefits, all ineligible expenses. We've had a lot of applicants, unfortunately, in the first round submit as an expense personnel. There is a category on the application online that allows you to select other, and people have been selecting other and typing in personnel, and we have to kick them out. We have to tell them that their application is not eligible to be reviewed because they don't have an expense. So just be careful and be aware that that's not an eligible expense. It's very hard for us to verify that and reconcile that the expense has been made, which is why we don't allow it. Inventory expense is another one, and then expenses incurred during the regular course of business. This just reinforces sort of the example I gave at the beginning, where those napkins, or maybe advertising is a good example. So every year you do a bunch of advertising around your special year-end event. You're still doing that advertising this year. That's not a COVID expense. That's just a normal business expense, not an eligible expense for this grant. All right. Pause there. It doesn't look like there's any questions right now, but we'll take questions at the end if folks have them also, or just type them in the Q&A box as we go, and I'll get to them at the end if I don't get to them as I go. All right. So next is business eligibility. All businesses are eligible for the grant. If you're a for-profit business, you're eligible to receive a grant. You must meet the SBA definition of a small business. It is pretty high. They do go up pretty high. I think it goes up to 100 or so employees, usually revenue amounts in excess of $10 million. So I think for most folks, you're going to prove that you prove to be eligible. This will not be a big obstacle. We do have on our website, which is delbiz.com/relief, some information about this in case you're worried that you might be over the eligibility standards, but they are pretty large. It's like a large small business that runs afoul of the SBA standards. A nonprofit, if you're a 501c6, we're actually also adding for the second round 501c19s. That's veteran organizations will also be eligible. Did not realize that they were a different classification than what we had here. So if you are a veterans organization here, our apologies, but they will be eligible in the next round. And then a 501c3 in a disproportionately impacted industry. We'll get to that in the next slide. That's really important. That's a special classification in this grant. Will be important for for-profit businesses as well that fall into those categories, but we'll save that for a second from now. Must be a Delaware company. 51% of your operations must be physically located in Delaware. Not if you're a Maryland-based or Pennsylvania-based company, you're not eligible for the grant or any other state. And again, if you're just incorporated here, that does not make you eligible. You have to have received less than $1 million in PPP funds. This was for at least our round one launch in September. But I think given the demand that we saw in September, we're going to keep it for the October round. So if you receive more than $1 million in PPP funds, you will be ineligible for these grants. We do want to try to target the smaller businesses in these initial rounds of funding. Okay, so this one's the biggest one. You're ineligible for a DE relief grant if you do not experience a 7.5% decline in your gross revenue in 2020 relative to 2019. And I know many of you are probably hearing this saying, well, we're midway through 2020, so how do I know if I saw a 7.5% decline? And two, how do I show you that I have a 7.5% decline? So the answer to the first question is we're asking you as the business owner to do that evaluation. You know better than anybody else where your revenue is at this year. Talk to your accountant, see how far you're down and try to make a determination on where you think the next few months might go. You might look at that. Certainly many of our businesses in the hospitality industry, many small retail businesses are down far more than 7.5% this year, unfortunately. They're down excess of 20%, sometimes 50% in terms of their revenue. They're going to know right away they're eligible. Some people might know right away, you know, I'm doing okay this year. I haven't been hit, for whatever reason, my business was not impacted as much by COVID as maybe some others. And then some people are kind of going to be right in the middle. You're just going to want to be careful, because what we're going to do to test this is in 2021, you need to come back to us and close out the grant with your 2020 tax return. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at that gross revenue number from 2020. We're going to compare it to the gross revenue number for 2019. And if you're not more than 7.5% down, you're going to have to pay back the grant to the state with interest. That's not intended to get anybody to kind of lock you into a loan. The interest rate is not attractive. It's meant to discourage you from applying in the first place. We really don't want folks who aren't seeing significant revenue declines. And what it allows us to do is get more resources to the businesses that are seeing larger revenue declines and who really might need the support the most. So just be careful, talk to your accountant or look at your books, try to figure out, you know, where you are this year relative to last year, and make a determination of whether this is a grant opportunity that makes sense for you. As we move into October, so I said at the beginning, there's going to be 3 rounds. So if you're not sure, you're kind of on the fence, will you see a 7.5% drop? You could opt to wait until the November round, when you'll have almost 10 months of revenue history at that point for the year. And you'll have hopefully a clear picture of where you stand as a business. Okay. All right. I see a question about the business able to apply if you started in 2020. Actually, Christelle, you were perfect. This is a great segment into the next slide, which is, so there's a special designation within these grants called a disproportionately impacted industry. A disproportionately impacted industry is essentially one that saw heavier job losses than all other industries throughout the state or throughout the nation during the months of January to May, when we had data for we were revising the program. So if you're not in disproportionately impacted industry, you're still eligible for the grant. It doesn't make you eligible for more funding if you're in a disproportionately impacted industry. It just does a couple things. One, if you were a business started, and this is why I said that question was a perfect segue. If you were a business that started in 2019 or before March 15th, 2020, you're eligible for the grant without having to show a 7.5% revenue decline. So you have to be in one of these disproportionately impacted industries, and then you're eligible for the grant. You might have an incomplete revenue history from 2019 that might make it very difficult for you to show a 7.5% decline. We're going to say, since you were in one of these industries, you were likely had a very rough 2020, even if you didn't have 7.5% down from last year, and therefore you're eligible. If you didn't start in 2019 or 2020 and you have a full year's revenue history for 2019, and you're in one of these disproportionately impacted industries, you do still need to show that 7.5% decline. Again, this is only for businesses that started business in 2019 or 2020. If you're a restaurant, which is a disproportionately impacted industry under code 72 here, food services and drinking places, definitely a disproportionately impacted industry, you're still going to have to show a 7.5% decline if you are 10 years old. It's only for those that have an incomplete revenue history from 2019. All right. And then the other thing that applies if you're in a disproportionately impacted industry, regardless of your age, so if you are that 10-year restaurant, this applies to you, is you can apply occupancy expenses to fill up the bucket, your grant bucket. And this is super important, because if you're in one of these disproportionately impacted industries, I'd recommend that you look at your occupancy expenses first. Occupancy expenses are your rent payments, or your lease payments, or your mortgage payments, or other expenses associated with your occupancy of a physical space. So if you're a restaurant, you can apply all of your rent payments from April 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2020 towards the grant. If you're in the retail industry, you see the other ones here that may qualify. I'd do that first. If you're eligible for a $20,000 grant, and your total rent expense from April 1st to December 31st exceeds $20,000, you've just filled up your entire bucket. You can get a grant, and basically that entire period, you can use the grant to pay your rent. You can use it if you've already paid your rent in the months preceding applying for this grant. We'll still give you the grant, you could just take that money and use it for other expenses. On the back end, you're going to have to show us that you paid your rent. We don't care that you paid it prior to receiving the grant with your own funds. Going forward, you can then use the grant each month to pay the rent. So it does not matter if you've paid it. If you actually owe rent and you're in one of these industries, you can get a grant to try to catch up on that rent. So really important thing to remember. Look at your tax return. That has your code. This is called a NAICS code, a North American Industry Classification Code. Match up this code from your tax return. And if you fall under that, then those two special qualifications apply to you. So I'll pause and see if I missed anything. All right, so there's a good question about nonprofits. So again, if you're a nonprofit, just review the code list, reach out to us. Your code should either be on your tax return, your 990, or your unemployment documentation that you file with the state. Should show you your NAICS code. But if you are in one of these industries, you will qualify for this grant. If you're not in one of these industries, the state is partnering with the Delaware Alliance. I always get the acronym wrong. Delaware Alliance for Nonprofit, Delaware Association for Nonprofit Organization, DANA. Sorry, can any of the representatives or senators help me out? It's DANA. I always forget what that stands for, but
Delaware Association for Nonprofit Advancement.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. So they are standing up a program. It's actually pretty similar to ours, both in the funding amounts and in sort of this use of eligible expenses, but they're just working directly with some of the nonprofit industry folks that they know well. So just be on the lookout for that. I think it was announced last week. All right. So again, to reiterate, if you're in one of these industries, still does not mean, if you're not in one of these industries, does not mean you're not eligible for the grants. Just means you can't apply the rent expenses. You need to fill it up with those broad eligible expenses I mentioned earlier. All right, so this is actually a breakdown of some of the statistics from the first round. I'll go through them quickly, but just to give you guys a sense of how things went in the first round. We had $54.4 million of grants applied for. That doesn't mean all 54 million will get funded. A lot of them we're now reviewing to see if they're complete and where they need to be. We had a heavy application volume from disproportionately impacted industries. Lots of restaurants, lots of retail, and then some other in personal care, cosmetology, and then you see some of these other ones that also apply. This is in millions, so about 16 million alone was from the restaurant and bar industry. Next, Senator mentioned it at the outset, and one of the things we wanted to make sure we were doing outreach to was some of the businesses we know were hit hardest by COVID-19 were minority and women-owned businesses. We were encouraged to see that in the first round, out of all the applications we got, we did have decent representation from some diverse business enterprises. We had 259. It's a little bit confusing because it does combine. So we asked for people to self-select if they are a minority-owned business or women-owned business, so we can track this to make sure we're staying on track. But so you could select. Some people selected both. You could be a minority women-owned business, and you'll see here how it breaks out. So if you calculate it all down, about half of our applications were from diverse business enterprises, which is good. We need to keep that up for the future, for the next two rounds. So we want to make sure we're still doing that outreach, but we were pleased, at least for that initial round, that the grants were well represented. We know in some of the federal programs, they had trouble doing outreach into those communities. And as both the equity subcommittee and I know the Black Legislative Caucus has identified throughout this period, is those were some of our businesses that were hit hardest. We've seen statistics on that as well. And so we want to make sure we're getting resources into those communities. So that's just a brief snapshot of the first round. Before I just go into the questions, I'll just say really quick, I said I would talk about some of the pain points, two major pain points to keep in mind that have caused people to get applications rejected, which is not something we like doing, but because of the volume, we really can't spend a lot of time with applicants if the application is incomplete, trying to get the information we need. We got to reject them, move on to the next one, and give them an opportunity to apply in the next round. but it can be disappointing to applicants. So one, not including the full federal tax return. This is a big one. People either just include the Schedule C, which is the first page of the tax return. Maybe they include the Schedule C with a few more pages. Just send us, if you sent it to the IRS, send it to us. Send us the whole thing. It's about 30 to 40 pages long. Don't worry about it being too much. You attach it. The whole application's online. And so you attach it to the application, and just make sure you get that whole thing in there. Ask your accountant. If you don't have an accountant, talk to whoever does your books, look at what you gave. Look, you can't send us too much. If you accidentally sent the IRS, a letter from your friend Bill that was saying something, and that's in your tax return somehow, just send it to us. We won't reject you for having too much information in your tax return. We will reject you for not having a complete tax return though. So it's not just that first page, and it is the federal tax return, not the state tax return. Second, the business license. You need to submit a copy of your 2020 business license. It needs to be your state of Delaware business license. Some people have been submitting to us local business licenses. We got a few from the beach. I think City of Wilmington does business licenses. Newark does business licenses. We will not take that. We need your Delaware state business license. So just make sure you're uploading the right business license. And then this one's less common, but still important to mention. Make sure you upload your 2019 tax return. Some people have given us their 2018s by accident. And again, it will cause you to get a rejection. Doesn't mean you're out. Your funding you're never going to get a grant. Just means you have to wait until the next round opens. All right. So I think our last slide is a bunch of contact information about how you reach us. We can skip this slide up. Perfect. So follow us on delbiz.com/relief. We do regular updates there. There's some videos there too that break down the application process. If you found my voice particularly soothing, I narrate those also for fun. You can go listen. But they're about 15-minute videos where I talk about the application process and show, all the things to expect as you apply. And it's really helpful, I think, for folks before they apply. You can't go see the application right now because unfortunately it does live 100% online. So when the portal is closed, you really can't do work on your application. But by watching the video, you can get really familiar with what you'll have to do. And so when the portal does reopen, you'll be ready to go. And then follow us on social. We'll announce any updates there when the next round's opening. Like I said, by October 1st. We are targeting October 1st. I'd say it's most likely to be October 1st right now, but there's a chance we launch a little bit earlier. But we will always give you a few days notice to get prepared. And then if you want to talk to a regional business manager and get some one-on-one assistance, just go to delbiz.com/contact and we'll explain how you reach out. So if you have any questions that I don't answer tonight, or things come up, or you're applying and things come up, just make sure to reach out. We're glad to help. All right. I'm going to go through some of the questions. Sharing the slides from the presentation. Glad to share them. We'll definitely share them. Christella, just let me know if you don't. I think you probably just have these, so feel free to just share them with anybody on here. Primary. So again, if you just look, if you did open in 2019 and you're not in a disproportionately impacted industry, unfortunately, it is going to be pretty hard for you to qualify. You will still need to show the 7.5% revenue decline. That's that big thing. And we don't prorate the revenue you earned in 2019. So if you're not in a disproportionately impacted industry and maybe you started in early 2019 and 2020 has been a particularly difficult year for you, then you might be eligible to apply for the grant because you might be 7.5% down, even though you have 12 months of revenue history for 2020 versus maybe 10 months for 2019. And that's perfectly fine. You're definitely eligible to apply that. Just be careful. If you started in November 2019, you've only got 2 months of revenue history, you're going to need to show a 7.5% decline in 2020 relative to just that 2 months in 2019. So you can see if you're not in one of those disproportionately impacted industries, it is going to become a bit more difficult for you as you started later on in 2019. All right. In business in their 36th year, definitely eligible. There's no age limit. So there's no upper limit to at what point we say, you're ineligible for a grant. It doesn't matter how old you are, you're definitely eligible how old your business is, you're definitely eligible, or how old you are as a business owner. We don't even ask that question. Grant, the same as the Delaware COVID relief grant. I think this one is in relation to the nonprofit grant. The grant that I mentioned, is the grant the same as the COVID-19 relief grant offered by the Division of Small Business? It's a bit different. It is a little bit different. And I have a link here. So it's just for nonprofits. It's a little bit different, though. Again, the amounts that a nonprofit would qualify for are pretty similar, and how they qualify is pretty similar as well. So I typed in the Q&A. I gave a link to that program. You can find information. They're working with the Alliance for Nonprofit Advancement. Essentially, is this specifically for minority businesses? Oh, the nonprofit program is for everyone, and if you've gotten a COVID-19 grant from us, you aren't eligible for the nonprofit grant. So just make sure you're tracking that. Applicants who receive money in round one are not able to apply for the remaining round. That's correct. If you receive money in round one, you're not able to apply. This is an important thing. I should have mentioned this when I was talking about eligible expenses. I'm really sorry, guys, but you want to overfill that bucket. So if you're eligible for a $40,000 grant, we recommend overfilling the bucket by about 1.5 to 2 times what you're eligible for, because that gives you some wiggle room. If we come back and we go through this and we're going to tell you this expense was eligible, this wasn't, this was eligible, this was eligible, this wasn't. Now you've got to spend that grant funds on those eligible expenses. Otherwise, come 2021, when you have to show us that you spent the money on the eligible expense and you can't prove that, we're going to ask for our money back. You don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to collect the money from you. So you're going to want to overfill that bucket with eligible expenses that you think are eligible, and then let us sort through it and say, no, this one's not eligible, this one is. And that gives you some buffer, because if you submit $80,000 of expenses and we come back and say 20,000 are ineligible, well, now you've still $60,000 of expenses from which to choose $40,000 of money from. So then you spend your $40,000. We won't ask you to report on the other 20,000 in that case. We just want to know that our grant funds were used on eligible expenses. But it'll be important that you leave yourself some wiggle room, so that if we do say, for whatever reason, this was an ineligible expense, same scenario, if you're eligible for $40,000 grant and you give us $40,000 of eligible expenses, now if we come back to you and say, well, $5,000 of these expenses were ineligible, you're still going to get a grant, but you're just going to get a grant for $35,000. You would have left $5,000 on the table. You can reject that grant. You could say, I don't want it. I'm going to come back. But now you've got to apply in the next round. And now you're risking, do you want the $35,000 now? Or do you want to take the chance that you might get the $40,000 later? So just overfill your bucket. Another good reason to overfill your bucket is if you're looking at expenses out into the future, estimating those expenses ends up that it costs less than you thought it was going to cost. Now you can just shift the money somewhere else because you have an overfilled bucket of expenses. Hopefully that makes sense. I'll see if folks asking questions. So, all right, going through the questions. Fell into a disproportionately impacted industry and have to convert my business to an online platform. Yes, yeah, Nick, or Nicole, sorry. Yeah, this is a great example of an eligible technology expense. So you had to do a bunch of conversion, move a lot of your business online. I'm sure that was expensive. A lot of that would fall into, actually, for a non-disproportionately impacted industry, this would also be a great example of an eligible expense. So thank you. The 7.5% drop in revenues. Yeah, thank you, Michelle. This is a great thing to hammer home here. It still applies. If you're in a disproportionately impacted industry, the 7.5% revenue drop still applies to you. The only reason it doesn't apply is if you're in one of those industries and you started in 2019 or prior to March 15th, 2020. Then we're not going to require that you show a 7.5% revenue decline, because again, you might have an incomplete revenue history from that year. But if you're in one of those industries, you started before 2019, you definitely have to show the 7.5% revenue decline. So just be careful. If you're a restaurant, if you were a restaurant who started in 2010, you're going to have to show a 7.5% revenue decline in order to keep the grant in 2019 relative to 2020 relative to 2019. Okay, next. For a disproportionate business, got a license in 2019, but started in 2020, we don't have to show a decrease. We can use rent we paid all of 2020. Yes, that's correct. That's correct, yeah. As long as you started, and we consider starting the day you earned your first dollar from a customer prior to March 15th, 2020, then you'll be eligible for a grant since you're in that disproportionately impacted industry. All right, next, I got a business license February 2020 to purchase a commercial property. Am I eligible for a COVID-19 DE relief grant? It all depends on whether you're in a disproportionately impacted industry and whether you have a revenue history that before March 15th. So this is a pretty specific one. If you have any questions, just reach out to us, and we're glad to kind of get into it with you. It's pretty case specific, but that would be how it applied to you. All right. What is the deciding factor which closes the portal? Volume of requests and amount of funding we have requested. So we had $55 million of grant fund requests coming in, and to keep it open any longer, we felt like we were making people go through the work of applying, knowing that it was likely that by the time we actually got to reviewing their application, we'd be out of funds for this round. So we closed it out so that, hopefully people, pretty much we thought we probably had $30 million plus of applicants in there. A lot of that 55 million will probably end up being scaled down as people are ineligible or something like that. But we didn't feel it was right for us to keep it open and keep going, knowing we were just inviting people to apply for a grant they probably wouldn't be able to get until October. All right. Yeah, a nonprofit exempt from a business license. Yeah, we're definitely aware of this. We actually waived the requirement for a business license. The portal will not let you advance as a way to try to make sure that people, we remind people to have a complete application. The portal will not let you advance without uploading a file, and it has to contain the word license in it. So we just recommend, upload that you could upload any file with the name license in it, but just, upload something from your nonprofit or, your articles of incorporation or your bylaws. Sorry, that's what I was looking for. You can do that, but really any PDF a blank PDF document or license will be accepted. That's only for nonprofits, and that's because we know you don't need a Delaware business license. So if you're for profit, we do need that license, and it's got to be the Delaware state license. Okay. Once application received and the portal and approved, what is the time frame when funds are released? Typically takes us about 3 weeks to process an application. And you actually create an account online when you apply, which you can use to keep up to date. There's like 4 different stages that it goes through, which you'll be able to see when you've cleared each stage. First is just that initial review. That's when a lot of people get kicked out and just didn't have the right stuff with the application. Then it moves to the second stage, where we kind of make sure you're a Delaware company. We do some more in-depth review of the tax return to see if there's any red flags, and then moves on to the review of the expenditures. So you'll see as it moves through each of these phases, if you log into your account. You can also get communications through the portal. And then hopefully by the end of the 3 weeks, you're approved and you walk away with your funds. All right. All right. Business able to apply if it was started in 2020. Yes. If you're in a disproportionately impacted industry and you were started prior to March 15th, 2020, you are eligible to apply. You wouldn't have to upload your 2019 tax return. We are going to ask for your 2020 tax return at the back end of the grant. So make sure that you've got that and you've got that in order. But otherwise, you're eligible if you're in a disproportionately impacted industry. If you're not eligible for the grant, unfortunately. All right. delbiz.com/relief, the link to the applicant. Yes, it is. There's it'll take you to a different portal, but that's where you want to go to kind of follow along and see, to make sure you're tracking when things open up. We always post it there. There's a link there that'll direct you to the portal. All right. So I think I've addressed most of the questions. Again, I don't know who the person's name is because it says anonymous attendee, but just that your case is very specific. I would just reach out to us, delbiz.com/contact, and we're glad to kind of discuss it with you. Otherwise, unless any of the representatives, senators have questions, I will stop there.
I think I saw a new question come in.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Senator. When we get this recording? I
Christella,
Yes.
they asked when they're getting the recording. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, they asked when are they getting the recording? So,
Next week.
okay. So
there's also there's a webinar on our website delbiz.com/relief. It's obviously not this webinar, but somewhat similar to tonight's content, so you can go on there and check that out as well if you're itching for more info.
All right. Thank you, Damien. I'm looking at a slide and not the video of myself. Did you change the screen?
I didn't change the screen.
Okay. So I don't know why, but I'll open it up for our caucus members for closing remarks. I want to thank Dr. DeStefano for his presentation and the information he shared with all of our attendees. We'll begin with Representative Chicoche in the same order that we opened up.
Thank you, Senator Brown. And I'd just like to thank you, Damien, for the presentation. The information was very timely, extremely valuable. I encourage all of our small business owners, nonprofits to apply. These funds are available to assist you in this time of need so that you can continue your business and providing the services that are so vital to our communities and that we really need. We really, in this sense and this time that we're in this moment, having the businesses that are providing the needed services within our communities, they're essential. So this funding is available. And again, I just encourage everyone to take advantage of this opportunity. Thank you, Senator Brown.
Representative Cook.
Yes, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to each one of you who participated in this information session and joining with the Black Caucus. I'd like to say thanks to Damien, also thanks to Senator Brown and Representative Dorsey Walker. Hopefully this was helpful and you use the knowledge and know how this is so important to your economic boost. Without participation of the citizens of Delaware, there is no growth. So again, thank you for giving us a chance to helping our minorities in the state of Delaware. So thank you to you all participating.
Representative Kendra Johnson.
Thank you, Senator Brown, very much. Damien, thank you so much for your time and attention regarding this very important matter. Thank you so much because the information was easily digestible and I imagine extremely helpful to all of the attendees. To the attendees, I say to you again, thank you for participating in your destiny by participating in this session to learn more about Delaware Relief Grants. Take care and thank you.
Senator Loughlin.
Thank you, Senator Brown. I just want to go ahead and say thank you, Damien DeStefano, to Delaware's Division of Small Business and the important work that you do, especially in this moment. It's been great to be a member of the Black Caucus bringing this presentation to you. So I hope that it was informative. I hope all of you take advantage of this opportunity to seek relief funds. And I hope further that you share the information that you've learned with others out there in the small business, nonprofit, in the small business community. So we can continue to weather this storm together and reach out to all of our offices. You can see our contacts displayed for any further guidance or needs that you may have. So thanks so much for spending some time with us tonight on this.
Representative Minor Brown. Okay. Representative Dorsey Walker. You're muted.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry about that. Thank you so much to Senator Brown, to the Delaware Legislative Black Caucus, to Damien. We appreciate you doing this presentation on this evening. And we would more than likely invite you to the Economic Empowerment Committee meeting at a later date to come and share this information with the committee members who may not have been able to make this meeting. We're very grateful for those who attended this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Christella will send out to all of the registrants the PowerPoint presentation and tonight's presentation on Monday morning. If you have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to Director DeStefano, but also you can reach out to each member of the Delaware Legislative Black Caucus. Our individual contact information is on the slide in front of you. You can also contact the caucus through blackcaucus@delaware.gov, where you can inquire with any questions that you may have, but also sign up for our email lists and other communications that come from the caucus. This next month, October 14th, the Delaware Legislative Black Caucus will be hosting a state contracting workshop on Wednesday, October 14th, 2020. So ask you to please register for that workshop, that webinar that we'll be hosting from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And we want to thank you for your participation this evening. We've made great time, and it is our hope that you will seek out the support of this relief grant, and that we will be able to help you in any way possible as you contact us to support your small business. Director DeStefano, before we go, is there any closing remarks?
Just thank you guys so much for having me on. I'm glad to come back too if folks want more information, or you know, we're going to have another round in November, so we'll be doing these through September and October. So thanks so much.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Have a great night.
Take care, everyone.
Good night, everyone.